There is a reason public trust in games media has been in freefall for years. And I think that reason has never been more fully laid bare than in IGN's latest article on Crimson Desert, published the morning after a Pearl Abyss shareholders meeting. Because when the CEO stood up and explained his team's decision, that they deliberately chose gameplay and combat over story, that it was a conscious economic trade-off, that they built what they do best and accepted the cost honestly, he didn't just show humility. He inadvertently dismantled IGN's entire review in one sentence. Because the core of that review, the jack-of-all-trades criticism, the implication that the game failed by not excelling at everything simultaneously, was answered right there. Pearl Abyss never tried to do everything. They chose, deliberately, transparently, and the market validated that choice completely. That moment deserved one thing from IGN. Not agreement, not a retraction, just the basic institutional honesty to say, our framework missed something real here. That's it. One sentence. The kind of sentence that would have earned more respect from this community than 1,000 well-written reviews. The kind of sentence Pearl Abyss just modeled in a room full of shareholders when they had every reason not to. Instead, they came back out and said, "See, even they admit we were right." And it speaks directly to the institution's own explanation for its collapse of public trust. Because they do have an explanation. They always do. The audience changed. Too populist, too reactive, too easily whipped into outrage to engage seriously with professional criticism anymore. An excuse for everything. Perhaps there's a kernel of something real in that. Perhaps there will always be bad actors in this space. But that explanation requires absolutely nothing from the people offering it. No self-examination, no pattern recognition, no honest reckoning with a track record the audience has been quietly and accurately assembling for years. Not the reviews that championed commercial failures, not the scores that moved markets in the wrong direction, not the contradictions between what they praised and what the world actually embraced. The fault always lies somewhere else. The audience, the drama channels, the culture. Always external, never internal. Pearl Abyss spent 7 years and approximately $133 million building Crimson Desert. They built their own engine, the Black Space engine, rather than licensing Unreal, like virtually every other major studio operating at this budget level. That decision alone speaks to something genuinely uncommon in an industry that is largely optimized for speed and cost reduction over technical distinctiveness. The result is a game that looks and moves unlike anything else currently available. Seamless world travel, physics-driven interaction, combat systems deep enough that players are still discovering capabilities 40 hours in, a visual fidelity that regularly causes people to stop moving just to look at what's in front of them. 3 million copies in 4 days, 5 million incoming. Top 3 on Steam as a single-player game 2 weeks after launch. The stock that crashed 29% on the back of critical reviews has fully recovered. Every independent measure available, commercial, cultural, financial, has delivered the same verdict. And then, sitting in a room where all of that was true, the CEO said, "We could have done better on the story." But he didn't stop there. He explained why. The team made a deliberate economic decision. Prioritize gameplay and combat. Let story be the opportunity cost. Finite time, finite resources. A conscious choice to build what they do best and accept the trade-off honestly. 5 million people validated that choice. And yet, there he was, every number on his side, choosing humility anyway. That's one corporate behavior. Now, let's talk about the other one. IGN published a review of Crimson Desert. one freelance reviewer, a 6 out of 10. And yes, some will say it's just a review, just one person's opinion, that the stock move was coincidence. That's a position that requires ignoring how financial markets actually work. At the risk of briefly going full finance nerd, the efficient market hypothesis holds that asset prices reflect all publicly available information. That includes institutional media coverage. In a market like Korean equities, where retail participation is high and sentiment moves fast, a review carrying IGN's institutional authority is exactly the kind of signal that gets priced in immediately. Most investors evaluating Pearl Abyss at that moment weren't 40 hours into Crimson Desert. They were reading the embargo drop. The score was the most prominent public signal available, and the market treated it as a proxy for product quality, which is precisely the function that aggregated critical consensus was built to serve. The stock fell 29% overnight. Institutional signal moves the market down. Independent market data, sales, Steam reviews, concurrent players, moves it back up. The signal was wrong. The market knew it before IGN did, and the institution that generated the wrong signal has never once acknowledged the financial consequences of doing so. When the shareholders' meeting transcript became public, IGN published a follow-up. On the surface, it reads fine. The quotes are accurate. The reporting is technically correct. But look at what was chosen and what wasn't. The CEO sympathizes with the disappointment over the story. Even they admit it. That's the framing. That's the takeaway they built from a statement that was actually far more precise, far more considered, and far more revealing than they let on. What the CEO actually said is worth being precise about, because the gap between what he said and how it was framed isn't just interpretation, it's the entire picture. He said the story could have been handled better. Then he explained why. The team made a deliberate economic decision to prioritize gameplay and combat over story, a conscious trade-off made transparently in a room full of shareholders. IGN quoted that accurately. What IGN didn't do, what they have never done, is offer the equivalent. A CEO who built something extraordinary, sold 5 million copies, sits at the top of Steam charts, watched his stock recover everything it lost, walked into that room and said, "We could have done better." IGN gave Veilguard a 9 and watched it collapse commercially and culturally within months, without a single word of reflection. They covered Concord warmly and said nothing when it became the fastest commercial death in gaming history. They scored Crimson Desert a 6, watched it sell 5 million copies, and remained silent, until the CEO gave them a quote they could use. On one side, you have 7 years, $133 million, 5 million copies, and a CEO who chose humility anyway. On the other, 0 product, a catastrophic track record, and not one word of accountability. Ever. But here is what IGN's framing quietly erased. And understanding this is the key to understanding why the trust collapse isn't accidental. The review's central thesis is Jack of all trades, master of none. A game that attempts everything and excels at nothing. That was the verdict, delivered after 130 hours of play. Now read what else the reviewer wrote in those same hours. He called the world absolutely gorgeous. He described moments of genuine wonder. He said there were times he was left stunned by the sheer magnitude of what had been created. He wrote about the kind of freedom that only games this large can pull off. He called the graphics and performance simply wild. He said it was hard to stay mad when he got back to running around the massive map, taking in the wildly beautiful views. A jack of all trades, master of none, is a game that excels at nothing. That isn't what he described. What he described is a game that excels precisely at what Pearl Abyss chose to prioritize: world building, scale, visual fidelity, open-world freedom, and falls short in the areas they consciously deprioritized. One is a failure of ambition. The other is the result of a deliberate strategic choice. The reviewer had the evidence of that philosophy across 130 hours of his own experience. He felt the world. He wrote about feeling the world. He just didn't have the analytical framework to understand what he was experiencing, that the strengths and the weaknesses weren't contradictions. They were the same decision viewed from different angles. And so he averaged them into a 6, called it Master of None, and moved on. When the CEO then explained the trade-off publicly, IGN surfaced that explanation as validation. See, even they admit the story was bad. What they didn't surface was the rest. The part where he explains that the story was a conscious sacrifice for something 5 million people found worth paying full price to experience. Whether that omission reflects editorial intent or simply a lack of self-awareness, genuinely unclear. What is clear is that the outcome is the same. The studio's honesty gets instrumentalized. The framework failure goes unexamined. And the reviewer's own contradictions, the wonder he felt, the stunned moments he described, remain buried beneath a verdict the market has already overturned. This is why the trust is collapsing. Not because of any single bad review, because the institution has never once looked at the gap between what its reviewers feel and what its scores reflect, and asked whether the framework connecting the two is actually working. Never examined itself. Never applied to its own work the same standard of honest self-assessment that a Korean CEO just applied to his own game. In a room full of shareholders, he could have spent entirely on celebration. To be fair, IGN has apologized once in recent memory. When their French branch called Stellar Blade's protagonist, and I quote, "a doll sexualized by someone who has never seen a real woman," the backlash was so immediate and so sustained that the institution had no choice but to respond. The PR cost of continued silence had simply become too high. The apology came. But that's precisely the point. The only mechanism that produces accountability from this institution is overwhelming external pressure. Not reflection, not integrity. Pressure. What Pearl Abyss demonstrated this week is something different entirely. A room full of shareholders, every commercial metric available to mount a defense with, and a CEO who, when put on the spot, answered with complete humility anyway. The distance between those two thresholds, accountability with a catastrophic track record that requires a viral firestorm to produce, versus accountability in spite of glowing achievements that nobody demanded, is a revealing one. There is a version of this where IGN does something different, where someone reads that shareholders' meeting transcript and notices that the CEO's explanation illuminates precisely what the original review missed, where one institution uses a moment of someone else's honesty as an invitation to practice some of their own. That version exists. They could write it tomorrow. It would cost them one sentence. The fact that they almost certainly won't isn't a dramatic conclusion. It's just an observation. The same observation the audience has been making quietly, accurately, and with increasing frustration for years. And it's why the trust is gone. Not because the public stopped valuing criticism, because the institution stopped deserving it. But, as always, before I go, thank you for the continued support. To everyone who recently joined the membership, donated, subbed, and commented, I'm genuinely humbled and grateful. If you want to continue the conversation, the Discord is linked in the description, along with everything else. Until the next one, peace.